Welcome, everybody, to the fourth meeting of the Urban Growth Boundary Steering Committee. And it's going to be a big, full agenda today. And before we start, we're going to do quick introductions again of the steering committee. And let's start with you, Jennifer.
Jennifer Lutz, mayor of Ben. Sisters, we were just talking about Ben, sorry. Redact, take that out.
You're new, we'll give you slack.
It's been a long week.
Ron Tehan, citizen, sisters, been here almost 40 years. So, thank you.
Morgan Greenwood, Sisters resident.
Therese Kohler, Sisters resident.
Art Blumenkroon, Planning Commission.
Anna Rasmussen, Sisters resident.
And Planning
Commission.
Rick Ritzman, Planning Commission.
Brian Metolius, Sisters Resident, Budget Committee.
Michael Preeton, City Councilor.
And could we have any ex officio members of the committee introduce themselves? Welcome. Could I have do you want to do anything, Emmy, at this point?
Good question. Okay, I'm seeing some new names pop up. Again, this is Emmy. I am trying to make sure that anyone attending over Zoom who's on the steering committee is promoted to panelist. So anyone who's on the steering committee, can you please click the raised hand icon? And once I see that, I will promote you to panelist. That way you are able to speak freely like all the other steering committees here. Susan Grabe. Hey, Scott. Is Susan Grabe on the steering committee?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Any ex officio members on Zoom that you can see?
I see Jen Kovitz with Hayden Homes.
No. Okay. Staff. To introduce staff.
Oh. And also staff, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Paul Vertagna, Public Works.
Jordan Wheeler, City Manager.
Matthew Martin, Principal Planner.
Emmy Shoup, Associate Planner.
Thank you. Could I have a quick show of hands if anybody in the audience is considering or planning to give a public comment today? Okay, so we'll do public comment around 4:30. And normally we would allow up to 3 minutes per person. So if more people come in that want to talk, we might shorten that, but I think we can probably accommodate up to 3 minutes. So thank you for coming and being willing to do that.
Just getting a few hands raised over Zoom of other people who are interested in comments.
Okay. Thanks, Emmy. All right. I think we can move on.
Okay, thanks, Chair. For the audience, my name is Scott Woodford. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Sisters. And we also have on Zoom today our consultants for this project, Andrew Parrish. And then I'm not sure if Matt Hasty is on the call yet, but he might be joining here soon. That's correct, Andrew?
Yeah, he'll be here shortly.
Okay. So let's just go ahead and get going here. If we can kind of skip to the first slide, we're going to do a little bit of a project overview. So here's the project timeline that we've showed and been following for this process. And we started back in March of 2024. So we're about 11 months into that process. And as you can see with the little yellow arrow, we're kind of at the tail end of evaluating alternatives. If the process continues to proceed as planned, the idea is that we would come back with, based on your feedback, a preferred alternative that we would be the subject of another steering committee meeting, basically to say, here's what we heard from the public, here's what we heard from the steering committee, the planning commission. Is this right? Is this the preferred alternative? So you'll get one more chance to kind of basically bless that preferred alternative. So we're also going to ask you a question tonight of whether or not you wanted to consider some other scenarios that might either extend the process or modify it a little bit. And we'll talk about that more later in the meeting. And then with our original timeline, the findings and adoption, which is kind of the formal land use process for this process. Once the preferred alternative has been generally agreed upon by the community, that starts a formal land use process with both the city and the county, resulting in ultimately the county commissioners and the city council voting on the proposal. And then there's some planning, additional area planning tasks once that is all done, which would basically provide more detail to that alternative or that UGB expansion area that would start to lay out some kind of roads and start talking about how utility access would occur, new roads that would need to be built to accommodate the growth. As well as kind of where maybe parks would go and where employment lands would go, kind of give a little more detail to the UGB area, so that once we kind of turn it over and say, if a developer or property owner wanted to petition annexation, they would have a pretty well-defined, not completely defined, but a pretty well-defined plan of what the city expects in terms of the project that comes in. So. Andrew, I will think I'll turn it over to you now. And just before I do that, I just want to appreciate everybody that participated in the open house, either participating at the elementary school in person or online. We got some great feedback, and we're going to review that here in a few seconds. Just to also let folks know that that doesn't mean that's the end of public comment. Public comment continues, and we continue to be open to hearing your thoughts. And so that will be an ongoing process throughout. So, Andrew, I think I'll turn it over to you to kind of talk about the open house.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, just to briefly review the things that we've been up to since the last time we met with this group. We had that December open house that we'll go into in some detail here, and we had an online open house that closed earlier this month that we have a summary of in your packet. We've been having some discussions, kind of informational discussions with folks at the U.S. Forest Service and the Oregon Department of Aviation. So those are kind of informational items that we'll talk about at the end of the meeting here today. Scott and the city have been receiving a number of letters and correspondence and having conversations with folks, and those are being kind of documented and placed on the website, and they'll kind of inform the body of work that will be forwarded on to City Council as part of this UGB kind of adoption process. There are a couple. There was the Deschutes County rezone application, which we will talk about today, and then we developed a draft alternatives analysis report that was in your packet, and we'll talk about that in some detail as well. Just make a note real quick. Matt Hasty is ready to join, but he doesn't have the Zoom link. So if one of you could email that to him, he'll be joining shortly.
And also, just before you start, Andrew, I noticed an email that Bill Willits, our committee member, is on. Apparently, are you seeing him?
Okay, let me check. I was just wondering because I see someone with their hand raised whose name is iPad. So let's have some fun here. I'm gonna call on iPad and see if that's Bill.
Okay, I think I'm here.
Can you please state your name?
Can anybody down there hear Bill Willits?
We can hear you, Bill. Can you hear us?
Perfect. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
Low technology skills.
All right, Bill, I'm gonna promote you to panelist if you can hear me.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move us into a summary of the public engagement so far. This is going to be pretty high level. There's a lot more detail in your packets, and we will continue to try, as we did in that summary, to sort of point to specifically where we've been using public input to inform what it is that we're doing to help the city make decisions here. So we had an open house on December 9th. There were more than 200 participants. It was, I think, maybe a record-breaking meeting for the City of Sisters in terms of number of attendees. We were expecting a lot, but we kind of you blew away our expectations for sure. We had a presentation with a little bit of information from the city and the consultant team. We had a brief Q&A kind of as a large group, and then we broke out into small group discussions to go through a series of kind of more detailed questions and to have folks sort of have a community conversation about priorities and what they think about the alternatives so far and give us some direction. So the themes of what we heard out of this exercise are, you know, a priority towards vacant property, land near the existing urban growth boundary, and a general desire to avoid sprawl or anything that might be seen as sprawl. Folks suggested that we prioritize land that can be served efficiently. So getting good roadway networks, good water and sewer access, things that that work better on the utilities and infrastructure kind of perspective. Folks really wanted to protect views. We heard folks wanted to maintain lower densities, kind of the small town feel of the City of Sisters. And a lot of folks were focused on the idea of housing affordability and maintaining livability in the city. On the online open house, we had about 390 participants who filled out at least one answer, which is a pretty good turnout. There was about a 50-50 split between folks who said that they lived in Sister city limits and folks who said they lived outside city limits. A lot of the participants said that they own property in the study area. About a third of respondents said they work in Sisters, and 90% said that they own their home, just to give some sense of who was participating. On the right here, there's a timeline of going from December 9th when the open house opened to when we closed it, kind of in early January. And it's a pretty typical you know, spike when it opened, and then there were a series of reminder emails to come and fill it out. And so we saw a couple, you know, dozen more people participate when those emails went out. We asked questions about the 5 alternatives that we had presented in the in-person open house, and we asked kind of how well, what's your level of support for this alternative, or how well do you think it performs based on the criteria, very good to very poor. And so what you see in this graph is everything that was very good, good, and neutral for each alternative. And so you'll see alternatives 1 and 5 were the ones that were more liked. A lot of folks were kind of poor or very poor for all the alternatives. And we did hear a number of folks who said, you know, City Sisters might not need to grow, and I don't like any of these. But we saw very low support for alternatives 2, 3, and 4, and those were the ones that included more of the land kind of at the outer reaches of the study area. We asked a number of questions that were kind of tied to those specific Goal 14 criteria that the city needs to use to make decisions about urban growth boundaries. So that's the State of Oregon Planning Goal 14. And we asked about things like efficient use of land, housing variety and affordability, protecting natural resources. And this graph on the right shows basically alternative 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in a row for each of those sort of topics. And you'll see alternatives 1 and 5 kind of rising to the top here again as well, being more highly rated in terms of these specific criteria. And again, low support for alternatives 2, 3, and 4. none of which was very surprising. The open-ended comments, I think you got a hefty PDF in your packet that has every comment that we received, but we did try to categorize these into a few themes that we heard that really resonated, and that we heard more than once, and we think are important for us to be considering. So that includes a need for affordable housing and workforce housing, some concerns about development near the airport, the statement that the city doesn't need to grow, and that we don't need more pressure on traffic and other infrastructure in the area. Lots of folks mentioned protecting wildlife and natural resource areas. We did hear some support for the process. People said that they appreciated the kind of clarity and openness that the city was undertaking this process in, and they thought the city was doing a good job. Concerns about wildfire, concerns about water availability, kind of broadly as a region. A number of folks suggested that we consider a hybrid alternative, or that we consider the McKenzie Meadows Village property specifically. That was mentioned a few times. As I said, alternatives 1 and 5 were the most popular. Folks suggested focusing on infill development in the current urban growth boundary, and prioritizing close-in and vacant properties. So that is the kind of a quick summary of what we heard in person and online, and there's more in the document that we provided. But I can pause here and take questions or any discussion about the open houses that committee members have.
Looks like there's none. Andrew?
Okay. Well, I believe the next item is public comment.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Okay, we're going to open it up now to public comment. Oops. And whoever would like to start off, remember to please state your first and last name and go to the podium, please, and your address.
And just in the interest of time, please keep your comments as brief as you can. And if you have some point that you think has already been made, there's no need to necessarily restate it. You could just say you agree or disagree with that point, just to keep on our agenda schedule. So thank you.
Test, test. Okay, we're hot. How do you want to go about calling people?
Are you ready, sir, to begin? We have our first, and then if you'd like to just line up behind or step up when a person's almost finished, we can do it that way to keep it moving along.
I'm Gary Landers, and I live on Trapper Point Road. I'm here to bring to the committee's attention building site flooding issues for the alternatives that include Trapper Point Road, which are alternatives 2 and 5.
Excuse me, can you speak a little closer to the microphone so the recording picks you up? Thank you.
The map of that area shows what the city believes to be viable building sites. What is missing from those maps is that approximately 10 of these properties flood periodically, mine included. The areas that flood include those marked as possible future building sites. I'm speaking of Trout Creek drainage. It is an ephemeral stream, meaning it flows for a short duration. When it does flood, it has happened in late winter or early spring and depends on winter conditions. If you go to waterdata.usgs.gov for Trout Creek and Sisters, the map will show the flow of Trout Creek from the Sisters Wilderness and changing to ephemeral in the lower forest. When I bought my property on Trapper Point Road almost 30 years ago, the seller's property disclosure statement said in part, Trout Creek drainage flows on the south side of our property and has on occasion overflowed, but has never come near the house. I have that document with me if you wish to see it. I don't expect you to take my word alone, so I searched our local newspaper, Nugget News Online, for related articles. I found 2 articles, one from about 10 years ago and the other from 20 years ago. One article from 2006 is titled Sisters Vulnerable to Winter Flooding, and outlines the flow of Trout Creek, specifically mentioning the flooding in Trapper Point subdivision and explaining why these floodplains are unmapped. The second article from 2014 is titled Project Tackles Trapper Point Flooding and reports on Deschutes County installing new culverts at the intersection of Trapper Point Road and Camp Polk Road to alleviate the flooding across Camp Polk Road after the waters have gone through the properties on Trapper Point Road. I'd like to leave those articles with the Urban Growth Boundary Committee tonight. Over the almost 30 years that I have lived on Trapper Point Road, I would estimate Trout Creek drainage has flooded 6 times. Sometimes the water flow is weak and sometimes it is strong. We are currently in a drought pattern, so everyone is focused on wildfires. But sometime in the future, the right winter conditions will occur and the flooding water will return to Trapper Point Road. Current homeowners on Trapper Point Road use those flood-prone areas as horse pasture, extended yard, or native landscape. These are not the right areas for future housing growth. And so I've also posted just what I said this afternoon. I posted on Mr. Woodford's email, which includes links to these Nugget newspaper articles. But if you'd like to have copies of them, I have them.
So those are, did you attach those to the email?
did.
I'll make sure that they get them.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for all that research and information.
My name's Molly Eater.
You could pull that down if you need to.
My name's Molly Eater. I live on Trapper Point Road also. And I did submit a letter of my own personally. And our whole road submitted a letter. 14 out of the 16 of us property owners signed it. And just to emphasize in person, we really like our neighborhood the way it is. It's horse properties with a lot of infrastructure related to horses, and we can't imagine adding more housing density to our neighborhood. So if you were to include us in the urban growth boundary, I don't think it would really accomplish very much for you because we're not going to add a lot of homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing? My name is Kurt Kahlberg. Been here for 38 years. I'm the only one that's ever lived on McKenzie Meadow. I built the house, the only house on McKenzie Meadow. Know the land better than any, raised my horses, grazed the ground, and this town has been very good to me. We built the movie theaters, a lot of Five Pine, the convention centers, Soda Creek Galleries, part of the industrial park. And the 3 families, one of being mine, would like to give back to this town. We've sent out a letter. Some of you have received it. Community, maybe not so much, but we have a real problem with workforce housing and homeless. When I first moved here, the homeless problem was behind my house. It was a hole in the ground with branches over it. And we had a guy named Norman and his dog that lived there. That was Sister's homeless problem. Everybody in this town took care of Norman. We got a big problem right now where we got hundreds of people out in the woods. We got kids out in the woods, and that's a joke. And last time I was at one of these meetings, I opened my mouth, and they were going to put trailers right across the street over there for some grade school. School was out of room. They were going to bring trailers in. That was the first thing you were going to see in this town, trailers. And I said, you know, why don't we just build 4 classrooms? I got a call the next day from Bill Reed, superintendent, Dave Swisher from the school district. He said, Kahlberg, are you serious? I said, yeah, I think we can do it. It was one of the greatest projects that this town ever did together. And we can do it again. With the help of the 3 families that have McKenzie Meadow, working with the city and that, we would like to do something. I'm old. I'm almost done here. And The next time this urban growth thing comes around, you won't be looking at me. You're gonna be dealing with my kids who don't live here, the other kids that don't live here, and they're gonna be millionaires. Right now, I would encourage the city to take advantage of some old farts that are willing to give back to this town. And that's all I got to say. I also want to, my friend John Tehan, the Lighthouse property, the Tehan property, the Sokol, all that stuff needs to come too. But we need light industrial. We need a lot of different forms of housing. And I think that Mackenzie Meadow can fill up, maybe not solve the problem, but we can sure help. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. I'd just like to remind people, when you come to talk, please also give your address. Thank you. If you, okay, thank you.
I'm Eric Wattenberg, 69015 Barclay Court. So I'm not in the city, but I'm right over there, just past John Tehan's place, right on the meadow. And I've had multiple discussions with Bill Willis, with John. Scott gave a great presentation at the assisted living facility to all of us in the Barclay Meadows neighborhood first subdivision. November 5th, I think that was. Great presentation. Thank you for that. I have kind of stepped back out of that now, and the rest of the neighborhood is taking over, running that, but there is a lot of concern. We're in priority 1. Maybe everything just to the east of here along Locust is great expansion, but when you hit the meadow, there should be no infringement upon that meadow. It is a jewel of sisters. I can't imagine that anybody on any of this committees would even dare of going out into that meadow. There are neighbors on the south on Parrott Huntington Road that I've talked with that have the same concern. That meadow should never look like a golf course with half-acre homes all the way around it. And with every place else you've got to expand in sisters, I would hope, even if that's priority 1 and that becomes your preference, that will be carved out somehow into a nature preserve, nature trails, animal corridors, all of that. Even that neighborhood has a distribution of the types of properties. Some are on the meadow and some are not. Some come back this direction up into the scrub brush, and those would need to be treated differently. So with that, I have 20 acres on the end of the meadow, on the end of Barclay Court, looking straight out across the meadow onto the Parrott Huntington side, right underneath John's property. Kind of look across at him. We abut to him in one part of it. So I haven't heard anybody just emphatically say, no matter what happens, that meadow will be protected. So I think that needs to come out of this committee very quickly, no matter where you decide to expand, what type of preservation you are going to insist on and put into this plan. So, and that will largely determine the support or the antagonism you get from the residents in that area. Thank you. And again, Scott, thank you for coming to the meeting. And we've had multiple conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name's Sarah. I'm also on Trapper Point Road. I just wanted to quickly reiterate what Molly said. About 14 of us so far of the 16 will not consent to annexation. We're in proposal 2 and 5. That's about 60 acres of the 250 proposed.
Say your last name.
Sarah Boland.
Boland, thank you.
Is there anybody else from the audience who would like to make a comment?
I'm just going to chime in here. So seeing no one else in the room who'd like to provide comments, I'd like to open it up to people over Zoom. So if you're attending over Zoom and you'd like to provide comments right now, I'd appreciate it if you would hit that raise hand icon, and that will allow me to see you and call on you. So the first hand I see is Jen Kovitz. I'm going to call on you right now.
Hello, can you hear me?
And thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Kovitz. I live in Bend, Oregon, and I work in Redmond, where I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Hayden Homes. Hayden Homes is a regional home builder. We were founded in Redmond 35 years ago. We have proudly built in the City of Sisters since 2007. First at the Village at Cold Springs, and most recently at Mackenzie Meadows Village. To date, Hayden Homes has built 479 single-family and multifamily homes for hardworking folks and sisters. In addition, our nonprofit First Story has provided home ownership opportunities for 9 families and sisters. These First Story families, all of whom earn 80% or below area median income, received a new home in one of our sisters' communities with a zero down, zero interest 30-year mortgage. Our commitment to the need to build homes that the area median wage earner can afford is why I'm speaking with you today. I'm here to ask you, the UGB Steering Committee, to formally request the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners to expedite their review of the pending Mackenzie Meadow Village rezone application. Thanks to your excellent work on this committee, you all know the challenges presented by the current Priority 1 site alternatives. The Priority 1 lands restrictive CC&Rs, small lot sizes with multiple landowners, and existing wetlands will all be formidable challenges to bringing housing quickly and at scale, not to mention building housing that's actually affordable. What's more, according to the just released Oregon statewide wildfire hazard map, nearly all of the current Priority 1 lands have been identified as high hazard. It's likely that if these high hazard lands are brought into Sisters UGB, they will be required to meet the new fire hardening statewide development codes, which will further inhibit cost-effective housing production. And I've asked Director Woodford to share these new hazard maps with you, so thank you. In stark comparison, the 58.5-acre Mackenzie Meadow Village property, which you'll learn about later today, has one owner, the LLC. The property is adjacent to the current Sisters UGB, walkable to existing schools and amenities. There are no restrictive CC&Rs on the property, and it is adjacent to existing city infrastructure. Furthermore, the property has been named moderate risk according to the new wildfire hazard map. In other words, on the Mackenzie Meadow Village property, much needed workforce housing could be built quickly and at scale. I'm confident that we all share a commitment to building a strong community and leading fulfilled lives. When home ownership opportunities are provided for our local workforce and families, we help the Sisters community thrive. As the UGB Steering Committee, please write a formal request to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners asking them to expedite their review of the Mackenzie Meadow Village rezone application so that the property can be included for consideration in the current Sisters UGB expansion process. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Going to see if anyone else over Zoom would like to provide comments at this time. If you can, please use the raised hand icon and I will see that you'd like to speak and call on you.
Oh, there we go.
I think we can move on.
That's it.
Thanks, Emmy. I just wanted to remind people on the committee and in the audience for that matter too, that we've received a lot of written comments that are posted on the city's website and the UGB page. And also for the committee members, you probably saw you have a printout of one that came in this morning from Tim Grabe that is basically talking about what we'll discuss later, the Mackenzie Meadow Village rezoning application. Thank you for everybody who gave public comments.
Okay, thank you for the comments. We'll proceed along with the agenda here. So if you want to share the screen with the presentation again, that'd be great.
All right. Yeah, the next item on the agenda is the rezone application for the property that was just mentioned, the Mackenzie Meadows property. I've got a couple of slides to just kind of describe what was in the kind of the notice, and then we can have a little discussion about how the committee would like to address this. So the property is currently zoned forest in the county. It's a F2 zone, and the request was to change that to mixed use agriculture. The the proposal says that the purpose of the change would be to include the property as priority one for this UGB effort, because as you may recall, we're required to evaluate priority one land first, and everything else is a much lower tier and pretty difficult to make the case that the city ought to bring it into its urban growth boundary, given just the size of the land that's in that priority one category compared to the need that is identified for the city of Sisters. So this zone change was a Deschutes County process. And so the county has its own criteria and its own procedures for these types of zone changes. The process has been initiated, but we don't know what that timeline is. So we've talked about, could be 5 months, could be 8 months, and then there are kind of appeals that could occur either way. Frankly, if it was approved or if it was denied, that decision could be appealed, and that could add more time to the to the process needed to get that zone change in. From kind of our perspective, we have done an evaluation of every property in the study area, and this property is in the study area, even though it's not in a priority one currently. But it would, for all the reasons that were kind of mentioned earlier, it would score very well compared to some of the properties that are in the current priority one lands. It is close to the city. It is currently vacant. Streets and infrastructure is stubbed to the property, et cetera. So the implications for the schedule of our process for this UGB amendment are uncertain, but we think that considering this property and including it as priority one, which we can only do once the zone change is actually completed, would likely add at least several months to this process. So we did talk to folks at the Department of Land Conservation and Development early on, and they noted that you couldn't just use a application or a intent to rezone a property to include it as priority one. You actually have to have it be zoned appropriately. So we've lined out a couple of options for what we think the committee and the city can choose to do. Option A is to continue the process as originally planned, using the priority one land that is identified in the alternatives report, the land that we talked about in the open house and the online open house, kind of stay the course. Option B would be wait for the county to rezone that property, wait for the county hearing. And if the property is rezoned to mixed use agriculture, we can include it in as priority one and then continue forward from there. Kind of another flavor of option B would be to develop a preferred couple of options rather than picking one kind of map. We would say, this would be our preferred UGB if the zone change does occur, and here's a preferred option if it does not occur. Yeah, that'd be another option as well. So with that, I think we are here to answer questions, but there's clearly some conversation that needs to be had among the committee.
So just add a little bit more to that we're basically looking for the steering committee to provide some direction to city council. City council will be the ultimate one, I think, to decide if we're going to go with one of these, which scenario we would go with. We'll also factor in the planning commission feedback, because this will go in front of the planning commission after that. But so really looking to see what the steering committee would prefer us to do. Potentially you have some questions to help kind of guide your decision making. So we're here to answer any of those questions you might have in terms of what the implications of each scenario are.
Scott, I have a clarifying question. So when you say city council will really be choosing and determining this, are you talking about these three options up there?
Yeah, correct. Kind of what we do, yeah, we do option A, B, or B2, or some variation thereof. We feel it's a city council decision that would direct staff to pursue that particular alternative.
Thanks.
That also means we won't be helping you in this decision. I'm talking about Mayor Letts and myself, so we're looking to you to come up with this option. You guys are the actual committee. We're just here to help out where we can, and this isn't one of those times where we will be helping out.
Okay, I have a question. What is the negative implication, or why wouldn't we ask to just, please county expedite this? I mean, we're not saying county, we believe it should be one way or the other for the outcome. We're just saying, could you please expedite your process? So what is the downside for us to do that?
If you're just kind of looking to get an up or down vote from, you know, to know what the county's going to do with it, I don't see a downside to that necessarily. It doesn't mean necessarily that this committee is going to ultimately recommend that it be included into the UGB. It could be that you would have the option to determine whether or not to include it in the UGB, the preferred alternative at the end. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Scott, this is the idea of potentially splitting an expansion zone has come up in previous meetings. Can you remind us what the total acreage of this potentially rezoned property would be in combination with Mr. Tehan's property and some of the other sites there south of the airport and east of Larch?
So your question was how much acreage would it be if we added these properties along with Mr. Tehan's properties and what other properties?
I believe there's a couple other larger parcels along maybe south of the airport along Berkeley there as well that are included in.
Not sure I can do that calculation in my head right on the fly here, but maybe Andrew, do you have the
I can try to get a general number to you, and others can speak to the subject property on the screen right now, how big that is, and I can get some of those other numbers.
That's 58 acres. I believe the subject property is on the screen here. John could probably tell you how big his parcels are.
Go ahead.
Just as a point of clarification, I believe that the subject property label is over land trust reserve, and the property that we're talking about is in that red box right there. So just for people that are looking at this might be confused.
Good clarification there. Yeah.
Would it be possible to do something like option B2 and put a time limit on it? Because that would be my preference, but on the other hand, I've gone through a zone change in Clackamas County and it took 2 years. So it depends on how patient everybody's willing to be. So maybe a combination of like B2 with the time limit, if that's possible.
I think anything's possible. So.
John?
Yeah. So the property I think that you were mentioning, there's down in that northeast section, I calculate there's about, without getting into the meadow or even going further south, there's about 160 acres right there. Because we constantly are talking about housing, but we have a need for 50 some acres of workforce and light industrial. And you wonder, well, where's that going to go? And so, you know, on the letters that have come through from McKenzie Meadows, there's just been some situations that I've been thinking through, and I wanted to just give a little history of how we have progressed over the years. So when we went through the comp plan and did this UGB in 2005-ish, McKenzie Meadows, which was unfortunate they were the only property that was brought in at that time, because that really curtailed where we could grow and how much we could grow. But that was 2005, and McKinsey Meadows has been built out for, what, maybe a couple of years? So 15 years it took to build out that project. It took a couple master plans, and there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, we ran into a recession, you know, COVID, whatever it might be. But that was 15 years, give or take. Clear Pine, which is one of our newer subdivisions, that was processed approximately the same amount of time, and that went through a couple zone changes, 2 master plan changes approximately, and about 15 years. Saddlestone, which is down in the northeast section of town, that went through 4 developers, and it took 15 years. So my point is that thinking that something is going to happen quickly hasn't proved out to this point. And when there's comments made like build outs in 6 years or don't hold property because of family wealth or whatever people are talking about, this is a 20-year plan that we're talking about. This is, you know, even though people want to get things done quickly. So those are just points that I think are important for us to realize when we start evaluating which way we're going to go and how we want to proceed. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott,
Anna?
I just want to highlight that I'm seeing Matt Hasty has his hand raised.
Yeah, why don't we wait just for, I think we have a couple committee comments. We'll circle back to you, Matt, here in a sec.
No worries.
Bill
I've
as well is
been,
raising his.
yeah, raising his hand repeatedly. So
Okay, and Bill.
Thanks, Matt.
So, but first,
Anna next, yeah.
I just have a question how we haven't really talked about like the urban reserve process. So there's the urban growth boundary expansion and then also the urban reserve, which we currently don't have, but we've kind of touched on, is that something we want to do through this process? So I think it'd be good to have a little more clarity on how the, you know, designating urban reserve for, okay, next time we expand, this is where we might be looking. How does that process work in relation to the urban growth boundary?
I'll just take a quick stab and then Matt and Andrew can clarify or correct me. But it's what she's referring to as an urban reserve is kind of the urban growth boundary is a 20-year supply of land that you would grow into. An urban reserve would be like a 20 to 40-year supply of land. So it would be the lands that we would look at expanding into for the next urban growth boundary amendment. So my understanding is that that is a separate process. It could be a follow-up process to the UGB, but it's something that is possible and it's been discussed.
Thanks, Anna.
So does that process for urban area reserve, can that be brought in at any time in this 20 years? In other words, if we pass an urban growth boundary and it isn't moving along as we want it to move along, can we then reevaluate and bring that urban area reserve in?
Well, I think you'd have to go through another amendment process to, like if certain lands weren't conducive to, they're not coming in for certain reasons, maybe, I guess you could maybe reevaluate it, or it's really designed for when you've kind of satisfied or exhausted a good portion of your UGB, that those would be the areas that you would look at first to expand again. But it would have to be a separate process to
And
do that.
like the zoning that McKinsey Meadows has now would eliminate that from being into urban area reserve?
Not necessarily. You mean if it stays in the county? If it gets rezoned, you mean? Or if it
No,
stays?
if it, as it is now. I mean, you're asking us to make a vote for something right now. And I'm saying, as it is now, and we're thinking that we want to do something with urban area reserve. Is that?
Well, that would be a follow-up process. We'd get through the urban growth boundary amendment process, and then we would say, council would say, hey, we think this is a good idea. Just direct staff to go through another process, a completely separate follow-up process.
So if they then go through their rezoning, get rezoned sometime in that process, can they then be evaluated for urban growth boundary?
For urban
Not
growth
if
reserve,
not
you
in,
mean?
No, if they get, yes, urban area reserve and then into urban growth boundary.
no, they would just be in the urban reserve, meaning that they would be among the first lands to be the first choice in the next go around, the next UGB amendment.
Well, even if things aren't moving ahead as we are participating or, hoping,
It'd probably have to be a number of years to say, hey, for some reason, these lands we brought into the urban growth boundary in 2025 are not working.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know if there's an opportunity to reevaluate what's wrong with those lands. Why aren't they redeveloping, or urbanizing? Maybe there's an opportunity to reevaluate it down the line. If that
I
answers
can
your
say
question.
a little more about this if you want me to. That's why I put my hand back.
Okay.
We'll let you talk, Matt.
Well, it's specific to this question, and that's why, if you want me to help with this question, I can help with it.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott is correct. Establishing the urban reserve would be a separate process. For good or ill, we didn't, allocate resources because that's going to take a chunk of time and effort as well. Scott's also right in that just having land in the urban reserve doesn't mean it's automatically gets to come into the UGB. You'd have to make the case that you have continued to have a deficit. So if, you went forward a few years, you developed a certain amount of land, you'd have to kind of go through an analysis again to show you've got a deficit. You could look at an exchange down the line. Again, if land was not developing, you'd still have to evaluate land per, the state rules, but you could look at an exchange and bring land in from the urban reserve, but you'd have to take land out from the existing UGB. That's another option. We're doing that right now in the city of Grants Pass, where they amended their UGB about 11 years ago, and they're going through a process now of exchanging land. And the first priority there, as anywhere, is urban reserves, and they have an urban reserve. And so we are proposing to take some land out of the UGB and bring land in from the urban reserve area. And in that case, there's not a deficit, so we have to take land out to bring land in. If you were able to make the case that you had a deficit, then you could bring it in without taking it out, or bring some in, take some out. But it doesn't automatically allow the land to come in. Like Scott said, it's got to still go through that process. So I just wanted, hopefully that's helps. I don't know, but anyway.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. I think Bill would like to speak.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to say I've appreciated working with Matt and Scott. I haven't worked that completely with you, Andrew, but really a good team. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I'm speaking from a historical perspective, i.e. John Tehan, i.e. my partner, Kurt Kahlberg. I am the managing director of MMV, so obviously I've got a lot of prejudiced blood in me. But historically, 20 years ago, to John's point, when we expanded the UGB, we have absolutely no idea that you'd move from being able to buy a quality home for anywhere from 120 to 210,000 to 800,000. And about 2014, we took our teachers, our firefighters, our law enforcement, and we priced them out. Their median income will not buy them a home in Sisters. And what I see us doing is going through the same process here, because that's the process that's dictated by DLCD, by our state. It happens to be the absolute worst process for our citizens, for our human beings. And I'll expand a little bit on that. I have requested, and I'm hoping this community would consider, a meeting in February. We bring in 3 community experts. One of them is Peter Hoover, Executive Director of Sisters Habitat. And he's going to tell the committee that the cheapest lot he can buy in Sisters today is $270,000, and that he only has a $180,000 budget with land, with SDCs to build a home. We call that impossible. And he will eloquently, I think, say that to our committee. Second, I've invited, with the committee approval, Kurt Scholes, our sister school superintendent, to come, because our school teachers, our starting school teachers, make $42,000 a year. Homeownership is completely out of the question, but so is rent, because $1,800 a month against $42,000 a year is about 50% of your income. And then thirdly, I'd like to invite David Fox, who's our Sisters Home Outreach Coordinator. We have 100 families living in our forest tonight. And of those families, we have 18 school children living in the forest tonight. And of that, approximately 20% of those people suffer from mental illness or substance abuse. 20 people out in our forest tonight. And then just factor in the word wildfire and ask yourself, does this UGB expansion enhance our community, or are we just doing it the way DLCD requires and following the wrong path? So I encourage each of you to consider honoring this meeting where we bring in experts. I think we have to devalue the where, but we have to value the why. We need to build housing for community members. We need to get these kids out of the forest and into homes or apartments. And that, to me, is what will happen. We are going to evolve as a state to create a new UGB strategy. But we're in the old mode now. Our governor is trying to shift it. A lot of people in our community are trying to shift it. And Sisters is on the vanguard. We're one of the first UGB expansions that will come into this state under Tina Kotek and under a 30% hope for affordable housing. I think we have an opportunity not only to do what's right for our community, but to set a template that will work for our state. And I thank you for your time.
Saying that this land would be quite a bit less expensive then, and so that instead it would meet the $180,000 threshold?
What I am saying simply, and John and I have had conversation on this, I think new land brought into the Sisters UGB needs to have a high level. The strata should be 20% or 30% of workforce and affordable housing. You want to develop in Sisters, Oregon, 2025 to 2045, you have got to find a way to provide affordable and workforce housing. Period, end of sentence. If we don't, we'll have 400 people living in the forest in 20 years, and we'll have $2 million homes in our community. So this is the time to change. And as a developer, I'm saying we have to do it. You know, the Kurt Kahlbergs, the Reed family, the Willitzes, the Tehams, we have to come together. We have to do this.
Thanks.
I'll get off my soapbox.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
That I saw that Abby has raised.
Abby?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just wanted to say, like, I agree with Bill's overall hypothesis that we need to have more affordable housing in Sisters, and I think that is like super critical. I think the way we're thinking about affordable housing can't just be in acreage, but in like the number of units. And like Sisters needs high density housing. I think that's the way to drive down like per door costs. I'm not a builder, but like just kind of running the numbers. And I feel like it's like this particular approach, like of kind of bypassing pretty much the UGB process to get land in. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do feel like the city or the UGB committee needs to lay down rules around high density zoning required to be used as high density, because like today what's happening is we have a ton of high density zoned space in the city and we still end up building single family homes. And single family homes are great, but ultimately, like if we don't build high density, we're just kind of punting the problem a little bit down the road. And like we've had, yeah, like I feel like to solve this problem long term, we have to be open to high density housing that can be built cheaper per door and smaller units. And that, to me, like that's pretty much the only way. It's not building single family homes for under $150,000. Like we need those houses to last as well.
Thanks.
That's it.
Morgan?
Thank you. Avi, I hear your concern, and I personally share them as well. I think much of your concerns are addressed most appropriately at time of annexation, when annexation agreements are signed. So the first hurdle to overcome is just getting the property into the UGB in the first place. At the time of annexation, then there's those refinements begin to be addressed. I do think, though, to echo some points that have already been made, and to honor some of the comments that were made during public comment, that we need to talk really honestly about the ease of urbanizing some of these other priority lands. We do have some challenges that we talked about. You know, CCNRs, as we have learned, are not a permissible impediment to not bring property into the UGB. But even, you know, there are other challenges there, including current real estate value, the ability for a single developer to assemble large large parcels that would make it cost effective to develop. So I think that if we really take into consideration what those challenges might be and the length of time that it would take to overcome those challenges, you know, John made the point that these happen slowly just by dint of the process. We're talking about a 20-year land supply, so getting something out of the ground in 15 years is, I hate to say it, but kind of fast. The larger question, I think, is are we going to do it right the first time? Because if we have to find ourselves in a situation a la Grants Pass, where 10 or 15 years down the road, we're all of a sudden doing land swaps because we didn't do it right this time, it is only going to make the crisis that Bill just addressed more challenging. So, I mean, outside of the moral imperative that Bill mentioned, we also have a statutory imperative through the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis that requires sisters to put up 100 units in the next year, and something like 1,400 over the next 20 years. So the choices that we make now do have some long-term impacts, and just thinking through what time really means and how much time each of these two paths might ultimately take, I think is going to would be really valuable for us to do.
Chair, if I may make a comment.
Sure.
City Council, with our being the elected officials and setting the highest parts of the policies of affordable housing down the road. Just from a historical perspective, Mackenzie Meadows in 2005 was required in its annexation 10% of affordable housing. I think I can easily say that it's going to be more than 10% next time. We can't say at this time whether it's 15, 20, 30%. I'm sure it's going to be what's best for the community. And we probably will not shoot low. We'll probably aim high. But until we actually have those discussions, we're not going to really know what those percentages are. But at the same time, if anybody's been to any city council meetings, affordable housing is something that we talk about almost every meeting in some fashion or another, whether it's how it fits into fire mitigation or how it fits into infrastructure and how it fits into the jobs in our town. we're definitely well aware of what the governor's numbers are, but we're most aware of what our community really needs. And so I think that it's great to have that discussion at all times, but to actually make formal policy at this time is probably, that's not really going to happen, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Michael. Brian?
I would like to thank Bill for his comment, because as the only renter on this in this committee, housing affordability for me is not like an abstract. My wife and I have been looking to buy a house for years now, and it's really a situation that I think I would really like to see option B2, and that is not necessarily. I mean, we can be open to these areas, but the process, I don't think, should be held up indefinitely. Like, I think we should forge ahead, and because this really is a problem that I would like to see, remedied in some way. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Anna?
I want to build on what Brian said and what Art brought up earlier, and kind of come back to this option B2 and ask this question, which is, Art brought up this idea of a timeline, like we want to move forward. We want to have maybe preferred options and put like a limit, like 6 months, a year, if we see it's not changing. So my question is this: if we write a letter and we say expedite the process, the county says, okay, we'll try. What's the minimum amount of time they're going to take? Because they have to do public notice, they have to do hearings. I know a lot of those things require 30 days, 120 days. So like minimum, they get the letter tomorrow. They're like, we're doing it as fast as we can. How long is that process? And that could kind of guide our, when we want to put time limits on things, thinking about the fastest and then like maybe the average amount of time.
Good question. And you bring up some good points about required noticing that the county has to do in terms of noticing of hearing officers, and if it goes in front of the county commissioners, and giving opportunity for the public to have their time. So those you can't shortchange those kinds of things. Those have to be done. So I think in talking with the planning manager at the county about this, I think 6 months is kind of the lower end of it, or might be able to. It's a question better suited for them, but my understanding is that you might be able to shave off a little bit of time, but because of those requirements in the code, there's not a whole lot you can shave off. But we could certainly, if this is the kind of the recommendation of the committee, we could certainly kind of ask the county planners a little bit more about what that means. And that, like I said, that this information is going to go to council, and so council's going to hear this on the 12th of February. So we hopefully have some good solid information by then. So that's kind of my understanding of what the timeline is, and so I may be wrong a month or two, but generally I think those are what to expect.
Thanks. Go ahead.
The other issue is, if you get a decision in 6 months, is it going to be disputed, or is it going to sail through? So that's the other thing we have to take into consideration. That's why I was just talking about some kind of a finite time period.
Kurt? Say, Kurt, could you speak into a microphone? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kurt Scholl, Sisters School Superintendent. So I appreciate the dilemma that's in front, and I appreciate the comments about a 15, 20-year plan. I have concerns for the next 5. About half of our workforce can retire, and they're at the top of the pay scale. And so creating turnover, recruiting high-quality teachers, even young high-quality teachers, when they can't afford to live in your community, is a real concern. So we've actually invested. We had not a teacher, but another employee get their Habitat home. We've had someone get into a rooted home because they can't afford to live here. So we're looking at other ways to get a subsidy to get affordable housing for our staff, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. We hire someone, a week later, sorry, I can't afford, even when I sell my house to move to Sisters, I have to reject the offer, and then we start all over again. So I appreciate the timeline, but it'll be an impact on us if there isn't some resolution of workforce housing in the next 5 years.
Good point. Thank you. John?
When we look at the need on the housing needs analysis, and we see that we have this excess of multifamily, is that what it is? Is that correct? Why would we say that isn't getting built on? Which is where some of the affordable housing is going to be.
So yeah, the housing needs analysis is the study that told us how many units we're going to need, and then kind of tells you what percentage of those units need to be multifamily versus single family. And those analyses are basically done on what the past experience has been. You know, most people who moved here wanted a single family. And so the way the process works, or the analysis study works, is that in most cases, I don't think it applies necessarily to Sister, but the thinking is that those trends would continue to occur in the future and people would still want single family homes. So that's why that when you look at that study, there's a higher percentage of single family homes or lower density homes recommended in the analysis. A lot of people have commented that that doesn't really do much for our affordable housing problem, but that's the way the state rules require that you go about the studies. And
So are we not saying that that land is affordable housing?
it's not necessarily, yeah. Just because it's multifamily doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable to the average person, I guess. It helps, but it doesn't.
So what price is affordable for a house? I mean,
Just
I'm
'cause-
not, I just, you know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of these numbers that go around 80% of this, 150% of that. You know, I'm not that good of a mathematician. I'm just curious, was that a $500,000 home?
No, it means different things to different people. It's basically, it's whatever you can afford that you're not paying more than 30% of your rent, of your 30% in rent of, or your mortgage every month. So I just want to maybe, we're kind of getting off on a little bit of a tangent here. And it's all great discussion and it's important discussion. And I think the council has committed to, you know, talking about affordable housing requirements once the urban growth boundary amendment is done. And it really should take place in our annexation criteria in our code. And I think that's a follow-up process on the heels of this process. I think what we need to really factor in or consider is, are the lands we're bringing in going to be conducive to that kind of affordable housing? If that's the desire that we want, you know, for instance, you know, we probably don't want to expand into areas that have steep slopes because that increases the cost of development and reduces the likelihood of affordable housing. So I think we need to kind of reel us back in a little bit to our 4 factors, you know, that we have laid out, that the state's laid out for this process, and kind of stick to that right now. Is my recommendation.
Sure.
We had some good discussion on kind of the question we put in front of you in terms of which option you guys would like to go forward with. And my recommendation is you kind of come to some consensus that you want to pass on to the city council.
Jennifer wanted to talk.
Yeah, I had one clarifying question. So the, state currently has kind of that emergency, one-time UGB expansion that, City of Bend's used in other communities. So can you explain that, or Matt or Andrew? And, is that possibly, just so everybody knows about it, maybe this could also be an option for this property so we can move the process forward, and it's not necessarily eliminating that as an option either.
Yeah, so what the mayor is commenting on is a House Bill 1537, I believe, in the recently passed by the Oregon State Legislature to basically help out with the housing problems that are the housing affordability issues that were occurring around the state. And so it's basically a one-time exemption from the kind of the longer review that we're going through for properties that meet a certain, that are less than I think in this case like 75 acres for sisters, that also would be required to bring in 30% of those units as affordable housing. So that's a one-time thing that the council can elect to do in the community. And you mentioned the city of Bend. The city of Bend just went through that process. So I don't believe that there's a timeline or time deadline on using that process. So that could be a tool that the city could use if these projects, or if a property owner came through and met the criteria.
That no matter what the zoning is, or do you have to would you have to do a zone change,
That-
for example?
Yeah, that's a good point. I believe that even with that scenario, you'd still have to not be a resource zone land. So if in the case of the Mackenzie Meadows, it would still require them to be successful in their rezone to something else. Yeah.
So back to Scott's point about we have these three options at least that we could consider for this decision. Does anyone have to have any other comment they want to make relative to that?
I think Abi has a question.
Abi?
Yeah, I had a clarification question, and like I'm sorry if this was already covered and I missed it because I joined late. Is there something that prevents them from changing the developer from changing their plan after the proposal is accepted? I'm just like thinking they're asking for 58 acres. It's a lot of land, right? Like you look at the size of that property compared to, like, even on this map compared to the city itself, it's pretty massive. Certainly, like, this is not all for affordable housing. And like, how do we know that they would actually do this thing? Is it just like we trust them, or is there like regulatory requirement?
So those requirements would be solidified in an annexation agreement that the city would put forward, and they would have to agree to those terms to be able to annex.
I see. Okay. But if we took this into the UGB, this would cover quite a large percentage of the land we actually need. So it's not like we would have a ton of options at that point.
Yeah, 20%.
Yeah.
Significant. Mm-hmm.
We show like maybe 160 acres for just housing
Mm-hmm.
in the housing needs analysis. And I think Land Watch is actually thinks that's a bit too high.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm thinking, they didn't say acres, but once I read through that, I'm thinking like maybe 20 acres. So really, are we talking 140 acres for housing?
And again,
If it's, again, it depends on if it all becomes houses or if it ends up having a park or a school or something else. Light industrial. There's not really a choice up there for putting a time limit that was suggested, like, okay, we'll hold this for 6 months. We'll continue our work, but we'll hold this idea for 6 months before we really make a recommendation for what the expansion is recommended by the steering committee. Can we add that as another option?
certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like option C? Or however people want to weave them together?
I think you might need closer to, I mean, you wouldn't want to cut it off right at 6 months. You might want to say a year. You might,
Mm-hmm.
to be reasonable, to know how the counties work and how long it takes.
Yeah, I think Scott mentioned he was going to reach out and kind of, you don't have to solidify the number right now.
Yeah.
Just say there's going to be a time frame he can get to them, I think, right?
That's good.
Scott, do we need to get back to you on this today, or could you go circle to the county and then circle back to us via email?
Guess I'd like to prefer to kind of maybe have some direction out of this meeting so we don't have meetings over email.
Okay.
So if you want to see if there's a consensus maybe, or.
Anna would like to say something.
I would just like, I like to move things along. I think there's two things we should maybe talk about. Like I would support writing a letter if that helps to the county. And I would just like to say, I also prefer this option B2, moving forward with multiple options and keeping the process moving forward with the understanding that this could change 6 months from now, but you know, we can have kind of our two things we push forward. You know, here's our preferred alternative with the property, here's a preferred alternative without.
And therefore not put any kind of a time constraint on it.
I think at some point we have a time constraint of when we put it forward to city council and other commissions, so we can maybe have some kind of language, like as we're moving forward, you know, I don't know when we want to give, like keep pushing things forward, but at some point it leaves, you know, our committee. So
I think that your timeframe was pretty adequate. The 6 months on the fast track, you know, is what we're hearing for the rezoning and giving them a little buffer, you know, not 7 years, but the year for them to make a decision on their zoning there. So I think we could be flexible in our package we present to council, you know, stating that, you know, yeah, keep going right now, but after a year, say, okay, it's not getting done, so we're gonna go with this first option that we had, you know, before.
Okay,
Could I interject?
sure, Bill.
Am I good to go?
Yes, you. Yes.
I want to say that scale, you know, we have 58 acres. Infrastructure is in, and we are committed to building 30% affordable and workforce housing. So to answer a concern, you know, we would agree to it in the annexation. We'd agree to it up front because our relationship with Hayden, our relationship with Habitat, I think will allow us to do that. I don't want to confuse that with other smaller parcels because it's not a one size fits all. If you're 20 acres and under, you need to be at 15 to 20% to make it pencil. Our scale, the infrastructure being in, is a huge advantage to Mackenzie Meadow Village. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
You be a little more specific about what infrastructure being in means?
Yes, when you build in sisters, there's a little rule called to and through. And so as you're developing a subdivision and there's intention that there might be a subdivision behind you, you bring the water, the sewer, the asphalt right to that point. And that's where we are. We're as ready as you can be. Obviously, it's a couple of year process, but we're as ready as you can be. And our relationship with Hayden has been one of working together collectively and successfully.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Bill, this is Jennifer Letts. I do have a couple questions. Have you already had conversations with your neighbors, i.e. the Forest Service, the school district, and the Tollgate Homeowners Association about this? Because
I've had conversations with the school district. I have not had any further conversations other than when we were testing out there, we had a lot of neighbors walking by with their dogs. So there was a kind of ad hoc communication.
How many units, when you're talking 30%, Bill, how many units would that be in total? So we could take 30% of that and figure out what that would.
The number, you know, we're going to have a site plan. We're going forward with a site plan, and we'll know specifically what those numbers are. But you know, but I think we're talking about potentially building 120. Don't quote me on this. Could be 110. It could be 130. 120 workforce affordable and/or special needs housing. That's going to be in the site plan that we'll have available in the next few weeks.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Mayor Letts.
Apologize. One more question, Bill, is that, you know, story after story coming out of Bend is that there's developer after developer who have made promises to do 30%. And I think an honest promises, not nefarious. And they are absolutely struggling to meet that or that number or anywhere near that number because of financial reasons, because of interest rates, because of building materials, because of wages, you know, everything we all
Sure,
suffer.
sure.
So how can you, you know, what is special about your project?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great one.
About that.
It is really a core question. I mean, how can we do it? What's the magic? And again, infrastructure is a big plus to start with. Flat dirt, big plus to start with. But the critical piece is our relationship with Peter at Habitat and Hayden Homes, and then a third group called Soul that want to build 12 special needs housing for their kids. And we know that we can, the problem today is completing an average lot. It costs just for infrastructure between $60,000 and $70,000 just for a raw piece of dirt. But if we can create a raw piece of dirt for $60,000 and sell it to Habitat for $70,000, that will allow Peter to build his affordable housing units, and that's gonna be 32 of the total units, the total 120 units. 12 of them are going to be built by a group called Soul, we hope, and these are going to be land contributed to them for kids with mental learning disabilities, a home for them. And then the final would be the Hayden magic, which is building workforce housing. And Hayden can drive down the cost of housing more so probably than any builder in Central Oregon today. They're pro-grade, they've got subs that can build these houses effectively and inexpensively. They have a whole division committed to that. And, so that's the magic. That's a lot of words, but that's the magic.
So Bill, when you talk about Hayden, are you speaking of the first story homes?
I'm speaking of first story homes, but I'm also speaking of their ability to build on a cost efficient basis. They buy more sheetrock than most building supply companies. They buy more plywood than most building supply companies. So they can drive down the cost of construction, and then their subs know these houses. There's not 111 floor plans. It's basic. Their plumber knows these, the electrician knows these. So they can drive down housing costs so that it's a potential break even, and then where they would make money is in the 70% front load family homes. So if they and we can break even on the 30%, it'll work out. It'll work.
Thank you. I'm getting concerned about the time. So I'd like to see hands about how many on the steering committee would like to send a letter to the county that says, please expedite this process. Okay.
The Zoom members, I don't know if you want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Abi?
I actually had a question, and so then I didn't want to keep my hand raised in accidental vote. So just so I'm understanding this correctly, this proposal has 120 affordable housing units that it adds to Sisters if we go down this particular proposal. Is that correct?
It's all
I
potential.
want to qualify that.
Not even,
it'll be somewhere between 110 and 130. I don't have the exact number. I apologize.
it's all I think it's premature discussion at this point, Bobby, because we don't know what the requirement is. But let's so.
I think what we're doing, though, is taking Bill at his word for the intention of the future of the property, to include some significant effort for a variety of affordable housing.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm just trying to understand like what the vision is. I guess like from a UGB perspective, I wonder if like that's enough of a dent for basically giving up 25% of the land that we could have in the UGB. Like 120 units is not a lot of units, right? For like that's not that that like barely covers our like current houseless in the forest population. That doesn't like not accounting for actual population growth, all the people that would want to live in Sisters, like who have kids in Sister schools, or teachers or people working in Sisters. And yeah, I wonder if like this what the UGB feels, the actual steering board feels in terms of like what percentage of the problem this actually tackles or proposes to tackle.
I appreciate your points there, Abi. I think that it's a little outside of the scope of this decision. My understanding from what Scott has said and our consultants is that the annexation process and also the tail end of the UGB committee's work will more focus on what we will require in certain areas. And there's certainly a big piece of land to work with here that will, to John's point, take many, many years to actually develop. But in the planning stages, I don't think right here, right now, we can draw the lines on what exactly we will hold Mackenzie Meadow Village to if they do get rezoned, and whether or not we would even include them in the UGB expansion if they did get rezoned. It's all TBD, to be determined.
And rezoning does not equal annexation.
It does not equal annexation. It does not equal a guarantee that you get in the UGB. I mean, from what we've seen so far, there will be some big pushback from people who live in the area especially, and probably some environmental heavy hitters. I mean, to be determined, but we're just making the decision here. Do we want our committee to recommend to the city council that we would be willing to write a letter to the county to please expedite for what that would be worth?
Yeah, I guess the reason I was asking this question is like if we would also take a position of supporting the application or not, right? So I feel like asking the county to expedite has an implicit or might have an implicit indication that we support the proposal, the rezoning application.
How do people in the committee feel? Do you agree with that statement? Disagree?
I think that our committee is tasked with selecting the expansion areas that are going to be urbanized most efficiently. And from what we have seen and the excellent information that Matt and Andrew have provided us, the likelihood of this property that's subject to rezone currently being urbanized is much, much higher than many of the other expansion areas that we have reviewed. So I think that if it's incumbent upon us to recommend to council to look at the areas that are going to be most effectively providing housing for our community in the future, that's what we focus on rather than the type and quantity and look and shape and feel of the community at this point.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
One of the things we need to be looking at is the ease of getting the infrastructure in and everything. And like you said, it's butted up to that. As part of our decision, is, we want 250 acres, but we also want to look at, we have to look at that, first choice stuff over there unless this gets annexed and it gets changed into where we can include that. But part of our decision isn't just the fact that we need 250 acres, but we want it easily built upon, not in the canyon, not in flood plains and that sort of thing. So I agree with you.
Well, Abi, do you want to vote one way or another?
So are we
We're
voting on
whether or not to, as a committee, suggest to city council that we do recommend that they write a letter in support of expediting? It hadn't come.
I vote in support.
I'm sorry. Steering committee. No, steering committee just suggest to city council makes the decision.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you vote yes, then I think we have a yes on that.
Okay.
Scott, do you want to have a separate vote on whether or not we add in the recommendation that the steering committee supports the idea?
Sure. You could take a
versus
vote. I guess you could
versus
take
just like write the letter to expedite?
Yeah, you could take a vote and then like you said, council is gonna all have to factor this all in. And
Right.
it could change. That's council's prerogative to take all this information and adjust it or do as they please. But they're certainly looking to the steering committee, I think, if I can speak for them, looking for your recommendation.
Okay, so in the steering committee, from an individual point of view, you would be saying, at this point in time, knowing what we know, I am supportive of the idea of bringing this property in enough. I feel strongly enough about it that I would like to see that in a letter from the city. Is that fair?
With a time limit on it.
It doesn't have to, that's another question. It doesn't have to have a time limit. You're just telling the county, please expedite. And oh, by the way, the city of Sisters would really like to have the option of bringing this into our urban reserve ASAP. But you don't have to say that. You can just say, please expedite. And perhaps imply that. So,
Does anybody want to add that to the recommendation? I guess, should we just, we're kind of halfway through our agenda and 3/4 of the way through our time.
yeah,
So
all
we
right.
need to make
so-
it moving on this, if we can. So maybe just a straw vote on if somebody
Okay.
wants to add that to the recommendation.
Okay, so we've agreed that we're going to ask for an expedited process. Who would like to also add in, and that we, as the steering committee, recommend to city council that the city of Sisters would support this rezoning effort? So,
I can't, raise your hands maybe a little higher so we can,
okay, 1, 2, 3.
so I don't know.
And a B.
There's,
I'm a no on that.
You would know on that. Okay,
so kind of split.
so kind of split.
Yeah, looks like and we'll just forward that to the council. It
And-
was kind
and-
of split on that issue.
Okay, and Susan is not here to vote.
She's not here, yeah.
Okay,
All right.
thank you all.
All right, thank you.
And
I
got less time to make your presentation. Do you think we can still get through all this? And
yes, I can be brief, and it's mostly duplicative of what's in the packet materials, so I'll try to focus on the stuff that is new and is not in the packet materials. I just wanted to note the kind of what's on the screen right now. I did hear support for kind of continuing with our process and keeping the rezone of this property kind of in mind and as an option, but we can potentially you know have go forward with if this does get rezoned and if this doesn't get rezoned, sort of options to bring back to the committee, and we can discuss maybe timeline implications after we talk to Plan Commission and City Council about the same issue.
sounds good. I think that's good summary.
Okay. So I'm going to touch on some of the points in the alternatives report, which doesn't include the Mackenzie Meadows Village property that we've been talking about, but it has a lot of information about the other priority 1 areas. So the point of this report is that it's going to be the factual base for the city in supporting its UGB decision, and it kind of lays out the decision-making process that we've all been using and tries to put some numbers and some kind of data and maps behind this conversation. And the final version will include, you know, here's what we analyzed, here's the alternatives we looked at, and then here's the preferred alternative or maybe preferred alternatives, and score those as well. So it does dive kind of immediately into the weeds with a number of metrics under each of those goal 14 factors that we've discussed. And these are things like the size of each parcel in the area, the improvement value according to assessors data, and various other criteria. And we've taken the step of of applying kind of weights to these criteria based on what we've heard from the community, what we heard in the open house, in the online open house, the discussions we've had with you all and with city staff. Um, and planning commission and city council as well. So we've tried to kind of document that pretty clearly in the report. We've listed the data sources and our assumptions. So if any of you are inclined to take a detailed look at this, you can provide written comments to Scott, and that'll make its way to us. I think it's probably the best way to handle those. In terms of how important you think a certain criteria is or other information you'd like to see. Generally, how this is working is that every parcel has a score for each of those metrics, and it's 1 to 5. There's a weight of the metric, so like high, very high, low, very low. And then there's an overall factor weight. So, factor 1, which is about developability of land, that's been very important in this conversation. And so that's a high weighted factor. Things like proximity to farms, less so because there aren't many active farms kind of in the immediate vicinity. And that didn't rise to the top in our community conversation. So that's something that has kind of a lower rating. So that comes out to, an actual number multiplication, and you get an actual score, and we sort of rate those based on the highest possible score that you might see in a certain factor or for a certain property. There are a couple of new items that we haven't really discussed much before. We have a sub-consultant on the team, Johnson Economics, who put together a lot of the work for the city's housing needs analysis and economic opportunities analysis. They have helped us with a couple of new criteria that we've incorporated to specifically look at developability of land and try to put some like metrics on that to make things make a little more sense, honestly, for us. So one of these factors is the number of expected lots at kind of single family densities that we would expect to see on these properties. And that's what you're seeing in the map currently. So the very light colors are low, kind of below 10 lots for each of the rural lots that you're seeing at about 5,000 square foot a lot. So the darker purple areas are the larger parcels, basically, that don't have much developed area on them. And then we take another kind of slice and look at the value of those expected new lots compared to the current value of the structures on the site and the land according to assessor's data. And what this is really showing us is that vacant lots are much more valuable. You get more lots out of them. The value of current structures on the site is very low compared to what you could build there. And this is where we're starting to see a place like Trapper Point. You're not going to get that many new lots out of these sites, and the current property values are quite high. So it's not really in many developers' interest to try to acquire those properties, subdivide them into new lots, and develop housing, affordable or otherwise. So we thought these were important new kind of criteria to add, and I think it kind of does the job of describing or illuminating the characteristics of some of these rural subdivisions that are right next to the city. They perform well on metrics of, is it close to the city or not? But really, if you're a developer, they're not the cream of the crop properties that you're going to be looking at to try to develop. So when we incorporate those new criteria into the overall report and take a look at the alternatives themselves, we wind up with the following sort of findings. So one item that I may have mentioned before is that each of the alternatives we've looked at so far, it gets its own set of scores, kind of based on the shape and location of the alternative itself. So it's more than just the sum of its parts. It's more than just the scores of all the parcels that are part of it. And the report goes through in some detail what our thinking behind that. But basically, on each of these 4 factors here, the alternatives have their own score. Factor 4, so this is different from a chart that I showed earlier, but each kind of group of colors is a different alternative. So alternative 1 scores pretty well across the board. Lots of these do well on factor 4 because there isn't much farm and forest land that is in the immediate vicinity. Alternative 5 does somewhat less well, and then alternatives 2, 3, and 4 do quite poorly based on all the criteria that we've been talking about. And lastly, these are some rolled up scores for each of the factors. So there's a number of criteria underneath each factor. If we add all those up and take a look at how each of the parcels are doing, you wind up with an overall factor score. So factor 1 is about efficient use of land. And this is where you see kind of the amount of developable area, the existing developments on site, and whether or not there are existing CCNRs driving the scoring here. The deep blue areas are the highest scoring properties, and these are basically the ones that we were talking about earlier. How much land is there really south of the airport that that we know makes a lot of sense to bring in? And so you see that performing very well here. The other deep blue areas are either very large properties or the open space parcels that are parts of other subdivisions. So that's kind of one lens to look at. Factor 2 is about infrastructure largely, and so topography and proximity to the existing city's infrastructure are the driving factors. So again, you see the close-in properties performing well, and the ones east of Indian Ford Creek performing more poorly. Factor 3 has a host of things like walkability, natural resources, and stream areas. Those drive the scoring there. Kind of a similar picture, but it is a little more checkerboard in some locations. One of the things in factor 3 is it's kind of whether or not you consider the inclusion of Indian Ford Creek itself as a plus or a minus. And I may have mentioned this at a couple of points before, but one thing we heard in the open house was both support for leaving wetland areas, leaving floodplains kind of alone in their current state in the county's jurisdiction, but also support for the idea of bringing some of that land into the city to use for parks and protected open space and things that the city might have more control over rather than the backyards of some folks with rural land. So anyway, that's one of the kind of swing factors for some of those properties, particularly in the Barkley Meadows first edition that was mentioned earlier in public comment. Lastly, factor 4 is based on proximity to farms and forests, and that drives the scoring there. So interior lands are doing well. If you sum all of this up and apply the weighting factors that we've drafted and that are in the report, you get this picture. Outer, lands that are farther away are performing very poorly. You can sort of see the lands that are performing very well. There are some lands that are maybe the most interior properties of the Trapper Point subdivision that seem to be scoring well as well. But this is basically one lens that we want to use to, like I said, identify the cream of the crop properties. We can get a summary of how many acres we're talking about here. And I think it'd be prudent to put these into sort of consideration with the Kinsey Meadows Village property as well, just to get you a total kind of acreage that is the deep blue properties here so that we know what we're talking about. And I'll have those numbers prior to Planning Commission meeting coming up in a week or two here. So that's my sort of summary of some of the main takeaways of the alternatives analysis report. We're still in the midst of it because we do have new property to sort of be thinking about and considering, and we don't want to get too far over our skis in terms of what we are or aren't including. But I guess I've got a couple of informational items that I can run through real quick, and we can take last comments since we have 10 minutes left, or I can pause now for comments.
Andrew, I think we pose that to the chair, whether or not we just maybe skip those items and just kind of concentrate on the alternative analysis. But guess do a time check as well. We're coming up close 10 minutes to the end of the meeting, the scheduled end of the meeting. Do we?
So you're suggesting skipping the informational items at the end?
It was in the staff packet. I guess we have more information that maybe wasn't in the packet that addresses some of those issues. And I guess it's kind of a larger question. Do we want to continue this meeting, extend this meeting out of 15 minutes so that people can get, the panel can have proper time to provide their input, or this is a little out of our agenda. We're past, we're kind of blew out our agenda. So kind of wondering what's the pleasure of the committee, if they want to take some time now and provide us feedback, or
would like to extend the meeting 15 minutes. No can do. Okay. What's that?
Bobby also raises his hand.
Okay, let's do that. Let's just keep it till 6:15. Thanks, everybody.
And one more thing. So based on that extension, do you want us to go through the Forest Service slides as well as the Department of Aviation real quick, or do you want to just concentrate on the comments on the alternatives for now?
Well, we have about 10 minutes to do the comments and then see where we are. How about that?
So say again.
We have about 10 minutes to work on comments and see if it's getting deeper and deeper. We can decide then whether or not to do that Forest Service. I mean, I think there's been a lot of public inquiry about both the Forest Service properties and the airport. Many, many comments. So I really would like to see that touched on tonight.
Okay, so maybe we spend 5 minutes talking about those two and then leave the last 20 minutes for comments and questions.
Okay,
Does that
we
sound
can
good?
do it that way.
Okay, so Andrew, let's go ahead and just be real brief on the rest of the slides.
All right, will do. So these next set of slides talk about the U.S. Forest Service controlled lands in the vicinity of Sisters. They're called National Forest System lands. We had a in-depth discussion with Ian Reed, who is a representative of the U.S. Forest Service in charge of these areas. So a lot of everything in green on the map here is federal Forest Service land. And there is a process. So the comments and questions we've been getting are, why aren't we talking to the feds to see if they have any land that would be appropriate to develop for Sisters housing and employment needs. And so we were told that the land conveyance, as they call it, can occur under the Town Site Act. And that is something that allows up to 640 acres of land under federal control to be provided to cities for town site purposes. Oregon is one of the states where that is eligible. And basically the process for this is that the community submits an application and any studies that are required for the land to justify the city, gaining control of that land. There were some other kind of processes for conveyance of U.S. Forest Service land for their administrative kind of sites and buildings that were within the city limits, so that the federal government did that, but that's not really applicable anymore because they don't have any more administrative sites. So so the city of Sisters has already taken advantage of this to some extent. This would be a totally discretionary decision on the part of the U.S. Forest Service, and the city would need to show that there are no alternative sites that are available to meet that the needs of the city, and the city would need to demonstrate that the action is in the best interest of the federal government. Like I said, there was some land acquired under the Town Site Act previously. I think the current sewer site, or the Scott, what's the name for the area south of the city? The treatment plant. Yeah.
Headquarters in the treatment facility.
Yeah, that was a Town Site Act kind of transfer of property to the city already. So this process can take many years. There's public comment, there's tribal consultation, and there's environmental studies required. So it's a big lift. Doing it for housing would be tricky. You may hear other instances of other communities, having received land from the U.S. Forest Service for affordable housing, and our understanding is those are generally the administrative sites that the federal government is no longer interested in maintaining, and so those are the kinds of areas where the U.S. Forest Service would give land for housing or something like that. So we got some clarity from the U.S. Forest Service, and it was a real helpful discussion. And I think this is, a lot of reasons why it might not be best for the city to rely on this land for its future housing needs. So our suggestion is, we won't assume that federal land is available for urban uses, but we'll continue to coordinate with the U.S. Forest Service. And the city and the Forest Service are obviously closely tied in the community, and will continue to coordinate for future needs. If there's a urban reserve process, that might be further discussion there as well. Moving on to a brief kind of note about the Sisters Eagle Airport. We had a conversation with the Oregon Department of Aviation, and they talked about the various sort of mapped areas that they have around the airport and what land use recommendations they have along those lines. So this map is showing the airport in the center here. There's an orange kind of angular polygon that's called the transitional surface. And that basically extends from the edge of the runway up pretty steep up into the sky. And then there's a horizontal surface that is a kind of cone up in space. And that's how they do their aerospace planning. There's also a runway protection zone, which is shown in green here, and that's a very strictly regulated area. You're not allowed to have buildings in that site, in that area. So the colors have switched here, but really the transitional surface is the one that we're interested in, because that has fewer restrictions than the runway and the runway protection zone. It does allow development, but they do have some recommendations for what they see as compatible development in that area. And that includes some of the land that was shown as, a good thing to include in the report and on our previous slides, particularly kind of south of the airport. So I think it has some implications for what we're talking about here. So there are height restrictions when you're very close to the runway. And there are a series of land uses that are considered incompatible in that transitional zone and in the runway protection zone. And so here are some screenshots of kind of their land use report. And things that are considered incompatible include residential uses, places of public assembly, golf courses, sports fields, and amusement parks. So basically things where people live or things where large groups of folks gather. But employment uses, commercial uses, those seem to be okay in these areas. And this the ODA said that these are more guidelines. These are kind of their recommendations, but they do look at each situation individually. And I think the direction we got was the extent to which we can focus residential uses and other kind of places of public assembly away from the runway and to the outer edges of that transitional zone to the extent possible, the better for them, and they would consider that a win. So it's not an automatic, you cannot do this, but they will have an interest in locating things near the airport, which makes a certain amount of sense. Um, so yeah, again, implications for our process, we'll consider locating compatible uses in the transitional area rather than the things they list as incompatible. So that'd be commercial uses, that'd be industrial, parkland as well. Limiting heights within the runway protection zone and the transitional areas that are right next to the runway is something that the city should have policy about, and will continue to coordinate with the Oregon Department of Aviation and the airport itself regarding future land use planning and development adjacent to the airport. So that is the extent of the material that I have for you. So we can move to conversation for the last 15 minutes here.
Thanks, Andrew. So it's open for comments about the previous part of his presentation, about the different alternatives and the different ways that they quantified the qualities. Andrew, can you pull back up some of the earlier slides before the airport and the Forest Service?
Actually, the summary slide that gives all the weight.
That have all the alternatives?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Total weighted score.
Thank you.
Yeah, but it doesn't show the boundary.
Focus on just making sure people get the comments of this.
In looking at the, when we were looking at the totals, it seemed like one area in particular was in the deep purple, pretty much under every scenario. And I think that's what we should be focusing on.
That was 1 and 5. A chunk of 1 and 5, that big chunk on the lower slide was really the
Yeah,
higher rank.
we need to bring the last, the slide before this up that we were. Slide after? Or the
total weighted, yeah.
Yeah, total weighted. So, yeah, there's one area in specifically, on the east side of the runway. There is that, I can't, yeah, on the other, right on the east of Camp Polk, basically, right off Camp Polk.
We did recently, one of the properties kind of in that area, Camp Polk, and not sure if you're seeing my cursor, but kind of around here, there was a subdivision application that was approved for, I think it was this property. Is that right, Scott?
It's to the east, just to the east.
Oh, further to the east. Okay, so in
Like
in
a little
this area.
cluster, three lot, I think. Three.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I was thinking more over right off, I don't know how many acres that is right off Camp Polk there. Or Locust.
You mean the
Right.
big giant?
Yes.
Giant. And
40. Too small, so you got 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. That darker color.
Yeah, that would be a nice chunk.
That was included in both 1 and 5.
And I don't know who exactly could quantify this, but when people say, like someone did in comment tonight, let's preserve the meadow, where does the meadow lie on this parcel map? Because the meadow that would.
The crosshatched, kind of the orange crosshatched area.
Oh, the watershed area over there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, because I mean, that whole thing, going down Camp Polk, I think of as a meadow too. Okay.
And the reason we want to include that, or would want to include that, is because the city could have some control, if it got annexed, some control to keep it a wetland park area so that a homeowner doesn't do something else with it. That's
Exactly.
one of the reasons we may want to include that,
Mhm.
but not necessarily a developable piece of land, but one that we want to preserve.
Right. So if we included that with the stipulation that it be conserved, then it would be more than 250 acres we would be pulling in. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, you can touch, but yeah, if that area would not count towards developable area. So you'd have to bring in more than 250 if you're bringing an area that can't be developed.
Mhm. But we could do it that way.
I believe so. Correct, Andrew?
Yes, and park needs are some of the identified needs that the city has. So some of that land could be counted towards, that. So it would actually come off of that 250 acres. It wouldn't be counted towards residential or new jobs or anything like that, though.
I had a question. In the past, you've had a little square that represents 250 acres. Uh, I think it's really helpful just moving forward to have that square colored by squares of like, we need 100 acres of residential, 50 acres of commercial. I'm a visual person, so reading a bunch of numbers doesn't always mean anything to me. So being able to kind of visualize with these maps, okay, we need this much residential, this much commercial, this much park, this much school. Because we know these are developable lands, but we also want to be bringing in green space. We also, it's not just housing. We talked about housing a lot, but we know we need industrial, we need all these other things. So thinking about weighing our different alternatives, it's helpful not to just think about housing, even though that's very important and we want to think about that.
It should be on every slide.
Yeah, that little
Honestly.
square should be on every slide and just different colors within the square, just to remind us, bring us back to the focus of this is expanding a city, not just housing. And we need to grow sustainably, and that means green spaces, things like that.
Housing's important, but all those other things are too.
Yes, we need jobs, we need spaces, schools, all those things.
Scott, is that something we could ask the consultants to do to backfill into these slides?
Yeah, for future presentations.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can, and yeah, well, that's a good suggestion. We can do that.
but especially these particular slides that they're presenting because they have like a new layer of information for us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, on that, as the, like option one, the yellow area. Yeah, basically each one of these options, do you have totals of the acreage, or are they pretty close to 250?
All of the alternatives have more than 250 acres because a lot of them include developed properties, and we made some assumptions about, half of the lot will end up counting towards that, et cetera. So they do vary in the gross acres that they encompass, which makes it a little hard to kind of visually measure, I understand. But I can definitely add an indicator of 250 acres to a future version of this slide.
Sorry, could you just repeat that last point again?
About the acreage of the alternatives.
About the acreage and that sometimes it doesn't, what you see isn't really what's available.
Yes, let me just show this for example. So alternative 4 here, that is much larger than 250 acres because it encompasses a lot of developed properties, and we didn't assume that that whole property would get flattened and then redeveloped. It's a portion of the site was assumed to be available for future development. So we assumed that the existing home would stay, and that the remainder of the site basically would be for future development. Similarly, if there's land that's under the crosshatched area, we assumed that wouldn't be developable, but needed to be included in order to reach other parts of the study area, for example. So these, I think in the alternatives report, or perhaps it was an earlier document, we did talk about how the gross acreage of each of these alternatives, and they're somewhere between 250 to 300, 350 acres. It does grow quite a bit if you try to include properties that have development on them currently.
Thank you. Anna, did you want to say something?
Is this point, are we trying to discuss which alternatives we like the most? Is that the point of this discussion? Or are we asking questions?
I think the point is to respond to this latest layer of information. Is that fair?
I think
That
it's,
is being
yeah, it's
presented.
kind of twofold, is just make sure that, are there any gaps in our data? Other items that we should consider to bolster the analysis, how it meets the factors. I mean, you don't have to pick a specific alternative. You could say you like a little bit of each one. It doesn't, those are just for discussion purposes. So, but they're helpful for discussion. I think they kind of, when you talk about one, people kind of get a sense of what you're talking about, but it doesn't have to be that exact configuration. So it's twofold, I guess. Do you have the information you think you need, or are we looking at how we weighted some of the factors? Do you agree with that, or is that's the kind of feedback I guess we want at this point, and just your general thoughts about maybe which alternatives or which parts of alternatives are kind of rising to the top for you?
I would like to see how the industrial fits into that, the green space, potential school, reserve, and industrial or, jobs will fit into those different alternatives. Because we focused a lot on housing and, it's easy to look at that and say, oh yeah, we can build some houses there. But how was the industrial or work going to fit into those alternatives?
Mhm.
I think that it would be helpful for me to see.
So it'd be helpful, I guess. So, yeah. Helpful to kind of know the general area you're talking about so that we could kind of help with that analysis, but it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right, for you, it sounds like.
And I have a follow-up to that, as that, how much do we weigh those certain elements? Because, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but in theory, we could bring in one of these options and maybe there isn't a lot of good industrial land, but then the city decides to free up some land inside the city that hasn't been developed yet that might be zoned for something else and kind of, flip-flop some zoning. I mean, so I'm just spitballing, so I'm just wondering, yeah, do we really need to be looking at lands coming in with, that critical of a lens of there definitely has to be, industrial here, and there definitely has to be, or can those just be kind of soft ideas?
I guess that's, Andrew, maybe I, kind of weigh on the expertise of, of your guys' experience. You heard the comment about wanting to have a little bit more idea where some of these different land uses are going. It's certainly a factor when you consider proximity to the airport, but do you have some suggestions on how to proceed with those comments?
Yeah, the report and the kind of discussion of how well the alternatives perform does have some language about this alternative has land that might be appropriate for commercial or industrial because it's near the airport or near the larger roads in the area. So that's one item. We haven't drawn it out yet because it's sort of premature to do that, but I think the end result of this process will be comprehensive plan designations, but that could just be a holding zone basically that says future urban and actual zoning designations to be identified at the time of annexation. We do see situations like you mentioned where there's a lot of industrial land that ends up getting brought in, but that sort of gets refined and put in the right spot and right sized, kind of in the context of the whole city as part of the like further refinement and area planning and comprehensive plan kind of swaps and updates that happen afterwards. So that is kind of a subsequent step.
We're running out of time here, folks.
Can I ask a question, please, of Andrew? This is Councilor Preeden. Would it be helpful if we took one, two, or three of the options and just throw them out the door? I mean, would that be helpful to this process?
I think we're at the point where we can probably do that. I don't know how much value it would really give us, though. We can see that those don't rate well.
I mean, I'm just trying to boil it down a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, maybe that'd be helpful for the broader conversation.
Yeah, I think the material that you presented here tonight, Matt, answers a lot of questions that were raised in the very first meeting even. So I think it makes it very clear what the most developable parts are, whether it's going to be for residential, commercial, industrial, public facilities, et cetera, is, remains to be seen at this point. Ease of development, again, is the question that we're looking at right now. I do think that, seeing this color coding and our previous discussion about the rezone property does again lend viability to the idea of a split expansion area. So, we're looking at approximately 120 acres here in the northeast part of town, approximately 50, 60 on the west side of town. I think it's definitely worth considering proposing a recommendation.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that we need to be a little careful when we talk about light industrial next to the airport. That isn't really that kind of airport. So, um, I guess in the bigger picture, Salem, Eugene, Portland, that makes sense. But if that makes sense here, I'm not sure. You think back in 2005, again, we brought in, or we zoned a large portion of Clear as industrial, light industrial. So we needed it. Oh, then we didn't need it. Oh, and now we need it. So I'm not sure what the ramifications of why that really happened that way. But, pardon me? Well, the economy and the lack of enough land in the UGB for housing. So we had to change our light industrial zone to housing because we didn't have enough in the UGB, along with the economy.
Can I make a suggestion that to Councilor Preeden's point, 2, 3, and 4 are kind of voted out by virtue of their qualities and how people feel about them. We could ask the consultants to look deeper at option 1, alternative 1, and then maybe a combination of alternative 1 with Mackenzie Meadow, if that evolves to be anything that we can really count on. And then maybe a third idea of some portion of option 1 and lands from somewhere else.
Option 5.
Yeah. But I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot about option 5 that is not embraced by the homeowners. So,
Well, no, we're only talking about option 5 to the point,
not the whole option 5.
Yeah, not the whole option 5.
Yeah. How does that sound to people?
Sounds good.
Okay. How's that sound, Scott? So it goes kind of back to what Anna was saying earlier, like we can consider, even though they haven't done the whole 9 yards with Mackenzie Meadow Village up to this point, we could still consider it as one option of, well, if that came to fruition, we know some things about it. And it's not like there's houses there already that we have to worry about a whole certain aspect of it.
I think it sounds initially good to me. I was going to ask Andrew what he thought about that in terms of how it fits into our overall process.
Yeah, in terms of direction, I'm hearing, well, let's look at alternative 1, and look at kind of the best areas of alternative 1 and a potentially rezone Mackenzie Meadows Village property as sort of a an idea there. So it'd be struggling with how to phrase it right now, but in the absence of a successful rezone, the city would need to find that acreage somewhere, and we'll start with alternative one and find the best sort of spots for where that might need to go if that rezone doesn't happen, and we can come back with some kind of refined options for you all at our next meeting. But I think in terms of the timing of that, we'll have to wait and talk to Planning Commission and City Council and see what they want to do specifically about the schedule and when we'll need to reconvene. Does that sound right, Scott?
Yeah.
Like option 5 to, option 1 and 5. So we'd like to see a 1A, 1B, that B includes the McKenzie Village, and then 5A, the way it is, and B that would wrap that in.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Are we thinking another steering committee meeting in late March, Andrew? I think probably not during spring break, but is that kind of the target for the next steering committee meeting approximately, or well, in that time frame?
I mean, I think that might depend, and maybe we could talk offline about it.
What we
But
hear from council, but
yeah, if we, there might not be a whole lot to say if we're still waiting on a rezone and et cetera. But I suppose we can have refinements to the maps that we just talked about, and that can be the source of a meeting. But I do want to talk calendar with you.
Okay, we'll get back to you on that. How about that? We'll get
Okay.
back to you on the next meeting date.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for staying late.
Yeah.
Appreciate all your input.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the public for coming.
Thank you all.